Started. Again, thanks for joining us today. This is the Gardens in Your Farm to School program webinar. This is Beth Hanna, here speaking. I'm from Community Groundworks. For logistics, as we get started here, we will likely still have attendees joining as we go. So know that there is a chat function down at the bottom. If you click on the chat, you're able to write a message to the panelists and also to your fellow attendees. So feel free to use that if you have questions or thoughts throughout our time together today. There's also the ability to raise your hand, I believe, if you're through the computer. So we are able to answer questions that way as well. And finally, at the end of our time together, we will have a Q&A session where we can unmute everyone and get some input that way. So if you're calling in through the phone, know that you'll have your chance to share as well. If there's any questions, feel free to throw those into the chat box. But I will get us started. I did want to, before I forget, make sure that I mentioned that if you are looking for registry credit for this webinar, that will be available, and you can email me. My contact information will be in one of the slides, but it is beth@communitygroundworks.org, and I can get you what you need. We are recording today. We started just a few minutes ago with the recording, so if for some reason you need to rush off the webinar, or if you have colleagues who you know wanted to watch, we will be sending out a link to the recording. Seems especially possible as probably many of you are surrounded by at least some level of snow, that perhaps some folks weren't able to join. All right, we're going to be hearing some other voices today as well. We have Vanessa Harold at CIAS helping us with some of the back end. Stephanie from the Wisconsin School Garden Network will be introducing herself in a bit, and then we have 3 panelists that you will be hearing from today as well. So without further ado, I think we are ready for the next slide. Here are our goals for today. We already did a welcome. We're going to talk a little bit about gardens and how they fit into Farm to School before hearing about the Wisconsin School Garden Network. And we'll spend a little bit of time looking at some resources. I'm sure many of you are familiar with many of them that we will share today. As I already said, we'll be having 3 panelists, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. We are aiming for about 45 minutes together, so hoping to have you out well before 4 o'clock. Next slide. Here we go. We're testing out our technology abilities. So we're going to pull up a poll wondering about, for those of us here, what your garden situation looks like. Go ahead and vote by clicking on one of the 3. For those of you on the phone, feel free to be thinking about your own experience. The options are, I don't have a garden, but I hope to start one. We did, how do I bring it back? And yes, you should all come see it. Still got some votes. Excellent. Polling is closed. More than half of our attendees today are new to the idea of gardening. So hopefully they are bringing some tips home with them. We've got a few that maybe had a garden, but along the course of time, things happened. And hopefully you have some strategies to think about what might help it bring it back to its glory days. And then a third of our call today has some gardens and hopefully has some tips to share with us about what makes theirs work so well. Thanks for participating in the poll. We're going to move that to the side and we're ready for our next slide. All right, so if you have a school garden or a farm to ECE garden, you are doing farm to school or farm to ECE. You can see some visuals here. The top picture is what the National Farm to School Network calls the core elements of farm to school. And there we see school gardens are one of the 3 core elements. In Wisconsin, we've been using this graphic that you see in the corner there to represent similar ideas, what we call the 4 buckets of farm to ECE. So they sort of line up with the National Farm to School Network in that we talk about buying and serving local food in the early care setting. We talk about gardens. Hopefully those garden tools look familiar to you, as well as that nutrition education. And we add a 4th bucket, family and community engagement in the early care setting. So you'll notice that both have gardens as a core piece of what farm to school is. And we talk about gardens being such an important part of farm to school or farm to ECE because it's often the setting that those other pieces can happen as well. We can have wonderful hands-on learning opportunities when we're in the garden. We can also use the produce that we grow as a part of meals or snacks in both our schools or early care gardens. And early care providers would like to remind you it's a wonderful place to engage family and community members as well. Again, whether that is at a school or an early care site. So just by essence of having a garden, so many of these other core components of farm to school or farm to ECE become possible. So let's dive in a little deeper to what it means to have a school garden or an ECE garden. And I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about the Wisconsin School Garden Network.
Thanks, Beth. I'm here to talk about the Wisconsin School Garden Network. We are founded in April of 2016. And our goal around is to create a network of schools, early care and education sites, after school, and other school garden support organizations, both at the state, regional and local level. Together, we're working to grow the school garden movement for the health of our students and our children. We're working to kind of define what that garden-based education is and kind of find those common goals and unite the efforts across the state of Wisconsin. I'm the outreach specialist, so I do a lot of training, workshops, webinars like this, along with providing technical assistance. I want to go next slide. We are a grant-funded organization, and we're funded through the Wisconsin Partnership Program with the School of Medicine and Public Health, and one of our core partners. We're a project of Community Groundworks, along with our partner at the Environmental Design Lab. Next slide. So this just kind of gives a little breakdown of what we do. Like I mentioned in the first slide, we are here to support teachers, educators, anybody that's working within school gardens or ECE gardens or after school gardens. We provide trainings and workshops, webinars such as this one. We also, a huge part of our work is developing and distributing resources. So we have a great resource library that is searchable that I'll show you in a second. But basically you can type through that library, you can type in any sort of kind of gardening related subject into there, like composting, or if you're looking for more resources. I saw a lot of people are looking to help start a garden. So we have a lot of great resources on our website about first steps, creating a garden plan, just different tips and trades. Tons of resources available on there. We also have a monthly newsletter that we send out that has always new resources there that is relevant to whatever month it may be. So right now, a lot of things, you know, as hopefully we'll be getting planting soon here once the snow all melts. We'll hopefully be sending out more resources about getting the garden started and prepping it for the new season. We also share a lot of stories from different gardens around the state, and then we do offer technical assistance. So if you have something that you're really struggling with, we are always available either by phone or email, or maybe coming out to your physical site. In the end, our goal is to create connections and build this network so that people feel supported across the state of Wisconsin. We'll go next slide. So here's just a picture of our homepage. It is wischoolgardens.org. And that will be at the end of the webinar as well. But here's, I've kind of highlighted in this turquoise color, the resource button, and there you'll be able to reach that searchable library that I talked about. Next slide. Right now we are running a Put Yourself on the Map campaign. So for those schools that do have a school garden, we would love to add your program to our map. Basically, it's just showing the support for the school-based garden movement across Wisconsin. And we want to make sure that people are connected. And so if there are those who are looking at starting a garden, maybe you're wondering what other school gardens are around you, who else is doing this work. And so this map is a great way to become connected with those around you who are also building a garden, and maybe you can go and visit that school and kind of get some ideas from them. So I will, if we go to the next slide, I can kind of show where if you go to our website again and go under Map Your Program and then click on Put Yourself on the Map, that is where you can submit your information to be added to our map, and then hopefully start connecting with folks around Wisconsin to help build your program. Next slide. Great. So as I mentioned, resources are a huge part of what the Wisconsin School Garden Network does. We're really trying to be there for educators and teachers and volunteers around the state of Wisconsin, providing them all of these different resources. And so here's just a couple of key ones. We have Got Dirt, which is also through, this is through the DHS, and we just have some links there. We'll be sending them out at the end as well after the webinar. I mentioned, our website is a great resource, and then the Wisconsin Farm to School website is also a great resource. If you want to go ahead and talk about in your chat box, if you have any other great resources, we'd love to have you share those. So feel free to put some great garden resources into there. But if that is it, we'll go ahead and hand it back off to Beth.
Thanks, Steph. And as you just heard mentioned, we will be sure to send out these slides after the presentation. If you missed it in the chat box, Shelby asked that great question. We'll also be sending a recording of the webinar as well, so you can look for that in a few days. And those, of course, will have live links as well. We will now move into the highlight of our webinar today, which is hearing from our panelists. We have three wonderful women here to share about their school garden or ECE garden experience with us. We're going to start out with Taylor. Yes, go ahead and move to the next slide. Hi, Taylor. And our two questions for Taylor, she's got plenty to share, but we're wondering about how she got started and if she has any advice for others who are looking to start a garden as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And to be speaking on this project in Coon Valley is brand new and underway, and it's so exciting. But we got started last year as just kind of an idea. So during our PLC time, right around this time, I remember it being green and gorgeous outside. We were thinking about how we could effectively teach about Earth Day, but have it be sustainable. You know, as our PLC was getting together, so I'm a first grade teacher, and I was meeting with the other first grade teacher and the kindergarten teacher and a couple other specialists, and we were speaking about Earth Week, and we just kept on coming back to the idea that it's really a bummer that we teach about Earth Week, but we don't feel like the ideas that are important, that we should be practicing daily, were something that were being carried out throughout the year for these students. It's not something that they thought about, when the idea of sustainability and living a healthy lifestyle and caring for yourself and nurturing your planet is all something that we want them to do on a daily basis. So the idea of a garden kind of sprung from that. And I had worked with a program called Grow Lacrosse in my previous district, and just knew that they had started the most incredible structures and gardens for schools. And so we reached out to them for a little bit of advice. And that's kind of where we got started there. But from that point on, it was kind of a lull. you know, we had this idea and we didn't really know how to implement it. And we had a couple resources, but we had no funding. And we had just we had no idea how to really get it kicked off. And so I guess I'm going to move into my advice now would be first thing you do if you have the idea of starting out with a garden is to talk to your admin and talk to people in grounds and saying, is this even possible? You know, so unless you have that okay, it's not going to be something that happens. So we went with the idea of this is where we'd maybe like to have it. And then it just sprang from there. We, after that, got the whole staff together and proposed the idea. And then we stood out in this area next to our school, which you'd see in the picture here, and said, okay, this is where we're thinking. We thought it originally like a 20 by 30 garden, and that's not what it became. After reaching out to more community members and people who had experience with gardening and just the connections that we had in our community, we were able to turn our goal and turn our plan into a 50 by 70 full space with permaculture, an outdoor classroom area, which you can tell up there, some raised beds and amazing trellises, grapes, and all this amazing stuff. So I guess my tip would be just never underestimate the community which you live in, because we are in a rural area. This Coon Valley is a town of 800 people, and immediately we brought 2 people into this meeting with us to help kind of brainstorm what we might like, and from there we had somebody willing to draw up a plan for us and a grid, and then they knew somebody who was able to do a digital scale, and that's where this photo came from, or this model came from. And then from there, another person went out to the Lions Club and reached out to other places, and just without even it being too much work on our end, these community members were so excited to be a part of it. So that would be my biggest advice, is to reach out early and start planning early, because it's going to evolve and it's going to become something that you're going to try one thing and then somebody else might have a resource for something, so it turns into that. So we slowly but surely have been just reaching out to different community places, community members, and allowing that to come as our biggest support for this garden, when we kind of thought we'd be relying on Grow Lacrosse for the majority of it. So if you don't have funding to be, or if garden doesn't have funding to be relying on a program, then never hesitate to reach out to your resources and see what they are willing to do and what you're capable of doing. So another tip I would say is to be kind of creative with your grants and maybe who you're asking for donations, because you know, you need that. That's a huge part of it. And we've been really blessed to see, or lucky to see, where all these donations have been pooling in from for our garden, and it just comes from word of mouth. And so start soon, be, you know, diligent about it, and yeah, it ends up becoming quite an incredible process as we go along. So from here on out, what we're doing is we actually don't have our garden implemented yet. It's in the works of starting. The snow is kind of pushing us back a little bit, but on May 12th, we plan to start really digging the structure and getting the fence up and the solid structures in after that. And then the summer school classes will start planting, and we'll have some community members maintaining it throughout the summer for us. So that's where we're at.
Thanks for sharing, Taylor. You hit on so many of my favorite points about starting a garden, especially my #1 piece of advice, to find some friends.
Yeah.
And you talked about your admin and grounds and teachers and staff. Sounds like a really wonderful community building project out there. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
If you have questions for Taylor, go ahead and pop them in the chat box. Then we'll also have some time at the end for those folks looking to join by phone. Next up, we're going to hear from Amber. Go ahead. Let's see. Our questions for Amber are, tell us a little bit about Grow It Forward, and once we get things going, how do we maintain our work for a school or ECE garden?
Hi, Grow It Forward was founded in November of 2014. And in, I believe, February of 2015, our local United Way had heard that we were interested in building a community garden somewhere in Manitowoc. And we said, that's great. Let's get started on this project. So in March, we wrote for funding from a local foundation, and by the end of, we received the funding at the beginning of April 2015, and by the 25th of April 2015, we built our community garden with the help of 350 people. To say that it was out-of-body experience is an understatement. I would have not been able to have even implemented this program if it weren't for the strengths of our community. And the United Way actually helping with volunteer coordination. Grow It Forward, we're a nonprofit local food hub, and our mission is to grow, teach, feed, and connect our local food community. Currently, we operate a combined 16 acres of community gardens throughout Manitowoc, the Manitowoc Farmers Market. We recently built a shared use commercial community kitchen. We have partnered with community organizations such as the UW Extension FoodWise program to offer farm to school education throughout our community. And we also serve as a business consultant in emerging food business opportunities within Manitowoc County. My experience with Farm to School actually began with a few different programs that I attended. The first of which was Victory Garden Initiative in Milwaukee. I attended their food leader certification program. And then I attended Growing Power's commercial urban agriculture program. And then I took Community Groundwork's Growing Minds from the Ground Up program. And then I became an AmeriCorps Farm to School nutrition educator and a community outreach member. And I utilized all of those experiences to help, I guess, support other community gardens or school gardens that were actively in various states of functionality within the city of Manitowoc. We provide support for, let's see here, 7 different school gardens in various capacities throughout the city. Some of my advice, I suppose, to give related to operating the school gardens or partnering with school gardens is to develop a diverse stream of volunteers. Never underestimate where you might find your volunteers. Some communities might have a retired senior volunteer program, or perhaps they have a functioning AmeriCorps program, or they might be able to find volunteers through their local gardening centers, or if your local technical college or extension has a horticulture program, that might be a resource. We found a lot of support from our master gardeners locally, as well as several garden clubs that we had participating in our community. We found out about some of the garden clubs from our local senior center. And then also our Rotary and a developing Boys and Girls Club also have provided some support for us as well. There are a lot of summer programs that take place in our community, such as the YMCA Y-Break program. And then also we do have summer school as well. So we have partnered with some of those organizations to and programs to support the school gardens. But when we started to participate in the AmeriCorps program, we realized that obviously not everyone has the capacity to support a garden throughout the entire summer. So some of the tips or tricks that I could say to kind of keep the energy and momentum around the garden throughout the summer would be to look at installing perennial plants. So let's just say you're installing rhubarb or raspberries or fruit trees for your school garden. Those are, I items that really don't take a lot of effort to take care of throughout the summer, because the seasonality of, the rain and the sun pretty much does the work for you. It's okay if you plant in late spring things like radishes and spinach or lettuce or things like that, and pull those up at the end of the school year. So if your school year ends in mid-June, it's okay. Your garden can actually go to rest, and one of the activities that you can do is to prepare that garden for fall when you return back to the school. So you can work on things like building soil and perhaps planting a cover crop. If you don't have an outdoor school garden, perhaps you can take your school garden indoors. And one of the resources or tools that I really like to use is a tower garden by a company called Juice Plus. The tower garden, they actually make it you can buy a base that's on wheels and you can roll it around from classroom to classroom. So that's kind of a neat tool. And probably one of my ultimate heroes in the food movement and in the school garden movement would be Stephen Ritz. He's done a lot of TED Talks, and he participates in a program called the Green Bronx Machine, and they utilize the school garden, the tower gardens in their program. If you're not utilizing perennials, or if you've decided to pull up the garden by the end of the school year, when you come back to school, you can do activities like planting garlic. One of the classroom activities that we participated in with the AmeriCorps program was to work on discussing area and perimeter by planting garlic. I would say to touch back on the fruit trees and to give perhaps a shameless plug for the Great Apple Crunch. It's a great idea to plant your apple trees in the fall, especially around the Great Apple Crunch, which takes place in October, and that's the National Farm to School Month as well. And it can be a fun activity where all the students kind of wrap themselves around the tree and give it a special wish. And, it doesn't have to be raised beds and planting carrots and things like that. But if you do decide that you want a more intense garden that does actively need tending throughout the summer, some other things I would recommend is make sure that you use mulch. And there's something called an oya or an oya. It's a unglazed terracotta pot that you can fill up with water, and that helps to reduce how much you have to constantly water your plants, because it lightly seeps out the water out of the clay itself. So if you do have other questions for me regarding my experiences or some advice or tips, tools, or tricks, feel free to send some questions my way.
Thanks, Amber. Always so many great tips for moving things along in our gardens, keeping them growing, whether it's indoors or out. What a great reminder that we can grow in grow gardens and grow towers or other indoor pieces. Excellent. And now our chat box is working perfectly. If you have a question, you're able to send it to all the panelists. And look at that, Amber can answer it for you right away. All right, our final panelist today is Emily. Emily is at Terry's Treehouse, which is an early, I keep saying ECE, but maybe that's not a familiar term to you. So ECE is early care and education, just for those of you who are from our school world. And I will actually leave Emily, of course, to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about her wonderful garden, and if she has any tips for engaging families in a garden program.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me too. So I am the director of, yes, an ECE child care facility, but we also have a summer program for school agers. So we have infant all the way up to school age. Most of our school agers have been here since they were a baby too. So it's definitely a family. I've been there 13 years, and when we started the program, the administrator bought it 14 years ago, and we started slowly, surely adding a little bit of just what we loved about the Northwoods. So Minocqua area, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's up north, kind of nestled in between some really wonderful cultural areas, but just very inviting. A lot of lakes, a lot of tourists, a lot of beauty. So I believe we started that about 12 years ago with trees. And then in 2012, we built a greenhouse, and the greenhouse was going to be accessible for all the students during play. So it kind of adapted and became organic in that natural sense that the children were introduced to gardening in a play setting, in a creative curriculum and environment. Everything was open-ended. All the resources were there and available, and to their extension or ability. With just the variety of students we've had, we average around 80 students in the summertime. So we have a nice group of children and families. But so then after that, we did decide that we wanted to have some extra space and extra area to grow besides the fruit trees. So we started just slowly but surely. The first thing we did was to find who was interested, and that it's probably going to be the biggest piece you're going to take from this webinar, is just that network is so important. Those connections or those stakeholders are the ones that are going to buy into the philosophy, it takes a village. And the more people you connect and the more resources, just the more facets you get, you come up with this beautiful diamond. And we started with our families, and we had so many families in the healthcare field, in growing business, but then also we had some tribal elders and those connections too. So we started kind of small with a couple beds, and then the next year we bought land connecting to the treehouse and went large. So we did an 80 by 80 program. And this, I've always been a gardener, but this was definitely on a scale where we learned a lot through mistakes. So I would suggest that preparation is just as important as the actual first day that you dig in. And then again, you want to network. So start going to your local farmers markets, start going to your Whole Food stores and your community services, connect with the master gardeners in the UW system, go to the greenhouses, go to the big stores and even the little stores. Mom and Pops actually helped us more than in anything else. And connect with the local schools too. We went to the markets and just found out who else was passionate about it and what they could offer. And, you know, not even just opening our hands. And in fact, we never have received one grant throughout this whole process, which when looking back at it, gives that pride back to that it takes that village, and the community really does believe that this is important for us, and that sustainability has really been invested in the children who now come back and want to volunteer or want to work at the treehouse 15 years down the road. But once we did our 80 by 80, we kind of started the ball running with what we wanted to grow. So it's good to first kind of just write down a list and break down with your stakeholders, what exactly do you want from this? And it's really great to involve the families at this point in that beginning phase too, because the more they are participating or involved, the more later on they're going to want that to succeed. And we started out doing that with our in-services or time frame that we already had allotted into the program. Once we figured that out, then we created a line item budget. And through our stakeholders, we figured out what we can do financially and what can our investments be maybe 2 or 5 years down the road. So we didn't have all the money, we didn't have all the financial support, but we did have the passion. So we did start with a Three Sisters garden, and all of the seeds and plants were native to the Ojibwe tribe. And connecting with them, we got some amazing seeds that hadn't been grown. Right there, that picture of those boys holding that squash is called the Gete Agusimum squash. And it means the really, really cool big squash. But we started growing that in a traditional sense. So we did that along with a pizza and a salsa bed, so it appealed to the children. We also created a curriculum, and it's a lot of fun to involve the students. And okay, well, what do you want to grow? What do you want to eat out of it? So we started up a program, and I think it was adapted from the Make It a Try It day. So every Tuesday, even including the winter time and the fall, we would pick something new to either harvest from our garden or something from the local farmers market, and then have to be in whole food and create something and share it. It's amazing how these children would eat absolutely anything if they grew it or made it. We also discovered the importance of perennials, and I think Amber touched on that, how important it is for the longevity of that garden is to grow those perennials so that the investment doesn't become such a big investment every year. And plus, then it can be a year-round thing, bringing those plants inside during the non-growing season. We also did an herbal garden. Everything there was multi-sensory. All the children, infants and toddlers, could go in and pick and eat whatever they wanted. We did a fairy and a gnome garden, and a roots garden, which you could see underneath the ground, and then a tabletop garden, in addition to the hidden berry spot. So once we ran our fundraisers after doing the line item budget, we did have a 5-year plan, and now we're hitting our 5-year plan, and we're going to meet it this year. Luckily, we have enough money saved, and we're expanding to create additional native seed beds and traditional growing companion gardens, and hopefully a really, really wonderful turnout. And then that sustainability should be easier come year after year, because now we're going to put in some solid garden beds. But it took a lot of planning ahead of time, and it took a lot of the network and the community to believe in the same vision there. So don't give up. Create a timeline, create a budget, and make sure it's flexible because Mother Nature sure is. And then make sure you have a measurement tool. So at the end of your growing season, you know, okay, well, this worked and this didn't work, and this is what we want to do next year. And the payout is amazing. The children love it, and I cannot wait for it, because especially with a winter like this, it's just wonderful to take your whole classroom outdoors, spend the whole summer out there. So good luck, and don't give up.
Such good advice. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch to the next slide, and you'll see a lot of those final tips are things that we heard from our panelists. Emily just talked about starting small and how something small can grow into something really large. Sometimes by starting small, it gives us that time to figure out the planning and who needs to be on board, like we heard from Taylor, those other pieces. The importance of being flexible, not only with weather, which this week attests to, like we heard with Taylor, but also with where our funding might come from, or resources that we maybe didn't even know about, like Amber spoke to. Finding friends, I said this before, is one of my top 3 tips, that nobody can grow a school garden program on their own. So who needs to be a part of that conversation? Folks within your school or your early care site, as well as families, and spreading from there. It really can be a community effort in no time at all. And finally, to remember, we're in this for the kids. It's their garden after all. So what can we do to really have it feel like it's a place that belongs to them? With that, we're going to move into our questions and answer section. We already have a few great questions lined up for our panelists. And there you see our panelists and some contact information. So let's see, how should we best do this? I have a few that we can start with from the box here. If you haven't yet have a chance to put your question in the chat box, please do so now. And we can also, if some folks are on the phone, we can figure out a way to unmute you so you have a chance to share as well. I know Amber answered about the terracotta planter, so we have that there. Kathleen is wondering, panelists, what are some mistakes that have happened? Maybe some solutions to those mistakes. And also, what has been a really important resource for you? Let's start with Amber. Amber, what are some mistakes that you have seen happen or made yourself?
I would say that some of the mistakes or things that I've perhaps learned by doing this for a little while is certainly by biting off more than you can chew. So it was awesome that we had 350 people that came to help build the community garden in one day, which it's a 2-acre garden altogether. 50 fruit trees were planted, and we have 50 raised beds as well. And some of our key program helpers kind of dipped out almost immediately after we built the garden. So here I am left with a very large project and kind of taking the reins. It's important that, you know, the project doesn't just rely, I think, on one person solely. Make sure you really have a strong coalition. Some of the things that I see in some of the school gardens throughout our state, but also throughout the country, is that the project is started by somebody who's really passionate about a school garden, and then that individual retires, or they move to a different community, or they move to a different school, or if it was a PTA member or PTO member that you know, their kids now have graduated or they've moved to a different school. You want to make sure that it's well invested. All the folks in your community are well invested in the garden, so that you know, it's almost like the garden doesn't take the face of just one individual, that it's a plethora of people. I would say that if for Kathleen, starting with just one plot in a larger community garden, I definitely would recommend that as a place to start. You know, because ultimately the upkeep of the entire property itself is reliant upon the organization that operates the community garden. So that takes off a lot of the pressure there. And one other suggestion maybe would be to partner with some of the other community gardeners that are there, that maybe the farm to school lessons can actually take place in someone else's garden. So that way you don't have to feel necessarily you know, restricted to having to take care of something all throughout the summer. So that would be, I guess, my advice there.
Good thinking, Amber. Taylor, any suggestions for resources as someone who started out recently as well?
Yeah, I would say if you're starting out, the best people to contact are ones that have done this before, kind of like we're doing today. I remember thinking, I have no idea what to do in order to get started. I have my own little, I mean, I'm fresh out of you know, 2 years out of college, I still live in an apartment, so I don't have my own garden even, other than a little herb pot that I have at home. So when we had this big goal, it's like, well, what are the first steps we need to do? And none of us really knew. So we reached out to Grow Lacrosse, and actually somebody came out and kind of laid it out for us and said, this is what you need to do. Here's your first steps. We'll get a plan going. Make sure you talk to these people. And so what I found out about working with so many different resources is that we all are here for the same goal and the same reason. It's that we want to bring these opportunities into our community and into the hands of the kids. So everyone's so willing to help out and share their knowledge, and really just without Grow Lacrosse, I don't know if we would have been off on the right foot. So they've just been the biggest support, and just out of honestly just wanting to see the garden succeed. So yeah, reach out to local, to either local or statewide, you know, corporations or groups that are doing this as well, like Wisconsin, you know, the one that we were just talking about, the Wisconsin Garden Network. So yeah, that's my biggest tip.
Thanks, Taylor. Absolutely. The Wisconsin School Garden Network can be a great place to find others nearby who are working on gardens, whether that's another school or an organization as well. Mm-hmm. Emily, you have a question. Are you willing to share your 5-year plan?
I sure am, and I actually was just working with this lady, Sean, from the UW system, who's actually creating a template for a tool that she wants to be accessible to anyone who's interested. And it's really neat. She's got several people on this forum that have been working for the same objective, and it's a real simple tool. You can download it online and use it at an in-service, and that right there is a good starting point to figure out, okay, your first year plan, your second year and third year, and then eventually, what is your outcome? What do you want? Like, make sure that you've got that measurement of that sustainability, because what you're going to find with most of these gardens, and what I've noticed going around Wisconsin, is that startup is great. That's probably the success of it. It's the maintenance that you'll see kind of filter trickle down, and all that money is just gone, and all that energy, because was no sustainability plan. And that's probably going to be the hard, is that maintenance. The financial aspect is usually like, oh my God, that sounds great. And I think Amber had said, okay, well, we had all these volunteers, and then all of a sudden, poof, they kind of disappeared after groundbreak. And so if you're able to build up what you want to see later on, people are going to come back and they're going to see, oh, wow, look at everything she's done. They're done. I got to get back on this bandwagon. This is pretty cool. And then network with the other schools in the area. I would be willing to send you that template. It's in the preliminary, but then also if you're in the area, or you want me to just email you some of the stuff from our resource portfolio, our beginning pictures, or if you want like our beginning budget or our blueprints, all of that, I'd be happy to share it for sure. Yes.
Thanks, Emily. And you can see contact information there, terry'streehouse@hotmail.com, is how you can get in touch with Emily and all of those fabulous resources. We are all certainly better off if we're sharing, and the more information we're sharing about mistakes, about challenges that we can help others avoid, we're all better off. Well, everyone, I promised I would have you out by 4 o'clock, and I want to stay true to that. The farm to school work here in Wisconsin is as robust as it is because of all of you. Thank you for your commitment to gardens and to bringing in local food and those other components of farm to school. This is the third of the series of the Wisconsin Farm to School and Farm to ECE webinars. If you have thoughts about what future topics would be really helpful, maybe it's another one about gardening, or it's about working with community members to procure local produce, let us know either by sending an email or putting it there in the chat box. We want to make sure that these webinars are serving their intended purposes. And we're very fortunate to be funded through a USDA Farm to School grant that makes these webinars possible. To stay connected to the work of Wisconsin Farm to School, you can click on that link. We'll put it here in the chat box and join our newsletter that comes out twice a month, second and fourth Tuesday of each month, and is full of great information about Wisconsin Farm to School activities, and has different resources in it for both schools and for early care sites. So take a peek at that. Actually, Steph, you can go ahead and add your Wisconsin School Garden Network newsletter as well to the box. That can be another great resource if you haven't found it yet. Excellent, thank you. And with that, thank you so much for joining us this snowy April Monday. Best of wishes with your future garden endeavors, and please let us know if we can be of any support in that project. Goodbye, all.
Thank you.